So yesterday, Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, who orchestrated the October 7th attacks on Israel, was killed by the Israeli IDF. Where will the war go from here? Just recently, a book by Ta-Nehisi, The Message, has a very controversial chapter in it on Israel and Palestinians, very biased. A Jewish CBS anchor interviewing Ta-Nehisi was reprimanded for calling him an extremist. In this episode, we bring on Jabra Ghneim, a Palestinian-born American, who tries to clear the air a little bit on the Israeli-Palestinian war, the tensions between the two sides, and offer a little clarity and context to the conflict itself. Now, this episode is brought to you by Go and Do Travel. I am the official spokesman for Go and Do Travel. Excited to talk about the Momentum Cruises, Momentum West happening January 4th through the 11th, 2025, and Momentum East happening February 8th through the 15th, 2025. This is an opportunity to cruise with hundreds of other Latter-day Saints, be entertained by top LDS talent, and experience edifying presentations. I've been on 3 of these cruises already. They are fantastic, new friends, fun times, and there's nothing quite like going on a vacation with hundreds of other like-minded people. Go to CwicMedia.com, scroll to the top to trips and events, and then scroll down to Momentum. Would love to see you there. All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we bring back Jabra Ghneim, a Palestinian-born American. We're going to talk about Ta-Nehisi and his interviews and his book, The Message, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Jabra, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Greg.
Well, let's get into this, right? Let's go right into Ta-Nehisi here. You and I have both read him in the past. He's got some controversy going on right now because of what he wrote about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in his book, The Message. What did you get out of that when you read that chapter?
Well, what I got out was, so on one hand, you get what you're expecting from someone with, his background. Mm-hmm. What I get is lots of projection of concepts such as, like, he involves slavery. He talks about colonialism and imperialism, and he projects it on, wrongly, he projects it in Israel. But what's amazing is, for someone who's as celebrated as Quotes, I counted, and I actually wrote them down. I have 10 pages next to me of logical fallacies and cognitive biases in that one chapter. Lots of appeal to emotion, lots of, ad hominem, lots of overgeneralization. So I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting, from someone like him, a more balanced approach to the whole situation, because we cannot ignore the Israeli point of view here. And he deliberately acknowledged that in several interviews. He acknowledged that he's deliberately ignoring the Israeli point of view, which deprives his reader of context that is necessary to understand this. You can't come to a balanced opinion about this unless you have the Israeli point of view on it. And he does not do that.
Yeah, he opens up, Jabra, in the chapter. He goes in and he says, okay, he goes to I'm trying to think of the name of, Yad something. It's where they keep all the names of all the members.
Yad
the Jews that have been.
The Yad Vashem.
Yad Vashem, that's right.
Yeah.
So he goes through the monument. He talks about that and how it did mean something to him. The atrocities there were more than he could bear emotionally. But then he turns it quickly and talks about the soldiers that are there with the guns. And it's like, okay, well, I understand why they would be there, because there's people that would be wanting to blow that place up.
Exactly.
Right. But he turns it into, that's his little turn into the oppressors, right? It's like, now I understand. He says something, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, here, but he says something to the effect of, now I could understand what was going on in Israel, right? The state that they were given, they've now got power. They have an army. They've got a state and a flag to rally around. And here's these soldiers with their guns. And so he quickly turns the Holocaust into the oppressors.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. So that's what's striking about this, is that he pays lip service to, why Israel actually exists, but then he, without addressing the nuance, because Israel exists not just because of the Holocaust. Israel exists because, and I don't know if we talked about this before, but Israel exists because all of a sudden between 1947 and mid-1950s, more than 1 million Jews from living in Arab countries were expelled from countries where they are more worthy of being there than the residents themselves, because they've been there for such a long time.
Yeah, thousands of years.
Thousands and thousands of years. Almost 1 million of these people get expelled, and where else will they go to? They go to Israel. And that is, so if you look at it from that point of view, the existence of Israel is because Arab countries emptied their Jewish population, ethnically cleansed their Jewish population, and basically sent them packing. And where will they go? They go to Israel. That was the only place where they are safe. So the problem I have with quotes and many, many, many people who talk about the whole Palestine-Israel issue is they talk about it without knowledge, real knowledge of the history. And I'm not even going to say real knowledge. I'm going to say knowledge of history, language, culture, all the nuances. Like, does Ta-Nehisi quote know Hebrew? Does he know Arabic? Like, he's looking at it through the lens of an interpreter. And for all I know, this interpreter is Hamas. He's probably not telling him half or more of the things that are going on, right? So he goes there for 10 days, and all of a sudden he writes this thing that is, again, huge emotional appeal, but he doesn't address the history. He doesn't address it from a proper perspective. And the thing, and I don't know if that's something you want to address later or not, but then there is the whole question of apartheid. And that is the problem. First of all, there is no apartheid in Israel. Mm-hmm. There is no apartheid in Israel.
That's not the way he frames it, though.
Exactly. That's not the way he frames it. But let me share this with you. The real apartheid, if he really wanted to do research, exists in the West Bank, in Gaza, exists in Jordan, exists in Egypt, exists in Iraq, exists in every Islamic country of the Middle East. It exists in Lebanon. If you want to talk about ethnic cleansing, talk about the nature of society there. So you want to talk apartheid? Okay, let's talk about how the Middle East, how places like the West Bank and Gaza, when they were, especially the West Bank, they had significant Christian populations there. Mm-hmm. I mean, in my lifetime, growing up, I would go to my hometown. I'd go to, my ancestral hometown, to Beit Jala, and that was a Christian town. And now it's a completely Islamic town. How did that happen?
Well, Lebanon was the same way. It was a very large Christian population.
And
what was it? At least the 70s.
Oh, it was at
maybe
least
even 80s.
At least 1/3 Christian.
Yeah.
At least 1/3 Christian. I mean, Lebanon was the Christian. Look at Egypt. Millions of Christians there. But the way the ethnic cleansing happens in there, it's under the guise of religion. So you have an Islamic religion that says it's okay for us to marry your women, but, meaning Muslims, it's okay for Muslims to marry Christian women. But if a Christian man wants to marry a Muslim woman, that's a big taboo, and the Christian man most likely would be killed. Mm-hmm. It's okay for Muslims to convert Christians to Islam, which happened with my own brother, but it's not okay for Christians to go preaching the gospel and teaching Muslims and converting Muslims. And there are many Muslims converting to Christianity, but they end up leaving the region because they know, first, they are shunned by their family, but then an outcast, but then they can be killed. I mean, it's a license to kill for any convert. And
I know some of these individuals. They've had to run to another country somewhere.
Exactly. So that's how ethnic cleansing happens. That's how apartheid happens. When you're a Christian in Jordan, for example, or Iraq or Egypt, you know that if you apply for a government job, you're not gonna most likely get that government job. You know, you're separated. You know that you can't live in certain neighborhoods. You know you can't do certain things. I mean, that is where real apartheid is. All Ta-Nehisi Coates had to do was cross the borders to Lebanon and go to Palestinian refugee camps. And by the way, these are not refugees. They are Lebanese citizens. They should be, but Lebanon denies them citizenship. He should go there and see how descendants of Palestinians, live in there. There is over 100 professions that they can't get into in Lebanon. They can't even be garbage collectors. And so you go to Israel, you go to what we call 48 Israel proper, which, is the whole land except for Judea and Samaria or West Bank and Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
And you go there and you see that Arab citizens, that's the only place where Christians are actually growing in the region. That's where Arab citizens can elect, they can express themselves, they have the right, they have every single right a citizen of a democracy has. But he doesn't talk about any of this stuff. He doesn't acknowledge it. And it's not good enough to say, hey, man, there is enough pro-Israel stuff out there that I didn't feel the need to talk about it. You have to, because contrast is important in this case. You need to know what's on the other side, what the other side is saying. So it's sad. It's sad to see even publishers publishing books like this.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because he talks about, he does this in his book, he's done this in his interviews also, but he talks about how, look, this isn't a complex issue. This is really simple. But you can make something really simple when you ignore all of the complexities and all of the histories here and narrow it down to just one thing. And he talks about, it's really, this is something else I've studied quite a bit, which is, critical race theory and critical theory. And he's very much what they call a crit, right? He's a critical race theory guy.
Absolutely.
And he talks about how this is a parallel to whites in America and blacks in America. It's the same thing. And that, he sees the Jews as the whites and the Palestinians as the blacks. He even calls it whiteness. He calls the Israelis he calls it whiteness in the book and makes this parallel. But again, it's like, wait a minute here. The Palestinians were never brought in from their other countries to be slaves to the Jews. Yeah. Right. This is the history here is so unbelievably different. It's not even close, but it's framed to be the exact same thing. And what is really interesting is those that follow that kind of what I would call a kind of a radical critical race theorist, which is a self, he calls himself this, right?
Yeah.
A radical black activist. And he says that lineage, that DNA has always been the same way, right? It's you've got those activists that have aligned with the Palestinians in this conflict for a couple of generations now. And it's interesting because Black Lives Matter, which I would see as very radical, right? Mm-hmm. When they first started back in 2014, 2015, they made a trip to Gaza.
Yeah.
And they aligned themselves with Hamas.
I know. I've read
and made connections there. And when you see these protests today in the United States, these are co-organized from across the ocean and from here in these connections and these networks that have already been built. So you've got the Palestinians that are there, and you've got the support from the organizers of what still is there of Black Lives Matter, making these, putting these protests together on our campuses. I know.
And those, so I wanted so much to address the protests on campuses because I've had a position on this, and, it got me blackballed about, about what these kids are doing, because they just have no clue, to be honest. They have no clue. But let's get back a little bit to that whole whiteness argument. When I look at Israelis, when I look at Jews, I see more in them that is Middle Eastern, close to Palestinians, the music, the culture, even the color of the skin. I mean, yes, there is a significant portion of Ashkenazi Jews who are from Eastern Europe and who wield power, but the majority of Israeli society, over 60%, I'd say, are what's called Mizrahi Jews. Mizrahi is a Hebrew word that means from the east, which includes all the Jews who lived in Arab lands for generations. And these people in culture, every aspect of culture, deep and surface culture, are exactly the same as Arabs. They are exactly the same as Arabs. Even the way they read the Torah, the way they chant the Torah, if you didn't know the two languages, Arabic and Hebrew, you would think when a chanter is reading the Torah, is reading the Quran. And when you hear a Quran being read, you'd think he's chanting the Torah. They use even the same kind of tone in music. So you can't say this is a whiteness argument. You can't say this is a colonizer argument.
Ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. I mean, and here is the thing. Again, as I said, most of these Jews came back, like the Mizrahi Jews came from Arab lands. They were ethnically cleansed from Iraq, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Yemen by the tens of thousands, by the hundreds of thousands. And they sent back to their indigenous land. Now, the whole colonization argument, again, it doesn't apply. Israel isn't a colonizing power in any sense of the word. These are people coming back to a land that they lived in for generations. Actually, and I'll tell you this, as someone who studied immigration, studied the Ottoman Empire, lived it, seen the history, knows the languages of the region. The Jews are the only, I would say, indigenous people in the area, if you want to use the term indigenous, because there has been, since time began, continuous Jewish presence in the region. Even after the Roman sacking of the first temple, significant portions of Jews remained, not in the millions, not in the hundreds of thousands, but Jews remained.
2,000 years ago.
Thousands of years ago. And the Arab population, including my own ancestors. So as you will know, for 1,000 years or more, the whole region was under the whole Transjordan Levant, what we call Israel and Jordan. They were under the Byzantine rule for 1,000 years. Then the Muslims came. And they controlled it until 1917, which is a significant portion of time. But we need to keep in mind that it changed hands so many times during that period. And by the end of it, by 1517, when the Ottoman Turks came in, and we have travelers who traveled through the region who wrote about it with no ideological, purpose or anything, who basically talk about the region during that period. And they say it was almost uninhabited. There was no one there. And most of the people, the Ottomans, realized that. And when they came in, and I'm talking about my own ancestors here, the Ottomans, because they wanted to somehow grow the land and economically make it more prosperous, they started what's called population transfers. So they started transferring people from the Balkans, from Italy, from whatever regions were under their control and where the populations were poor. They started transferring them to the Transjordan Palestine. And so you look at my own DNA, for example, it tells the whole story. I have Greek DNA.
I'm fascinated in this.
Yeah, it's significant portions. Greek DNA, Italian DNA, Jewish DNA. I mean, I have more Jewish DNA than many Jews I've met. So the Jewish DNA and then Mediterranean DNA. And so it tells you the story. It tells you the story of that population transfer. So when those demonstrators on campuses say their famous phrase to Jews, go back to Poland, I would say, okay, we can tell you the same, go back to the Balkans, go back to Greece, go back to Italy, because that's where more of our people come from. I'm sure you've seen pictures from Gaza. You have Gazans who have white, fair skins, blue eyes. Where did that come from? My own grandfather was a blonde man. He had fair skin, blonde, white person. So the whole idea of whiteness, colonization, go back to Poland, you came and colonized us, doesn't work. And then you look at the actual geopolitical history of the area. When the Ottomans were defeated in World War I, that whole region fell under the British, Sykes-Picot, etc. That whole region fell under the British. When the British left and the Arabs rejected the 1948 UN mandate, what happened was Jordania, when the Jordanians were defeated and retreated, they retreated to East Jerusalem and what we call now the West Bank, and the Egyptians retreated back to Gaza. But they didn't annex those areas officially. They didn't say the West Bank is a part of Jordan or Gaza is a part of Egypt. Those were kind of buffer areas, buffer zones between them and the new state of Israel. I mean, my own uncles, my mom, my dad, they grew up during that era. They were in their teens. And Jordan wasn't really their country of citizenship. They could have gotten a Jordanian passport, which thankfully my dad did. He got a Jordanian passport. But many people opted not to, because that area, many people in that area didn't consider themselves Jordanian, Ottoman, British, or whatever. So for even to say that the West Bank is occupied territory is not true. And for anyone to say there is something called Palestine is not true. Now, we can say, people who are living there have declared it, so fine, let's talk about it. But historically, there is no such thing as Palestine. There is Jordan, there is for the people in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, there is Gaza for the Egyptians, or Egypt for the Gazans. But that area's situation was never resolved. And that's why the Israelis say, well, it's okay for us to go and build settlements there. And, they've tried. And this is, again, one of the things that is shocking to me that Coates doesn't mention in the book. He does not talk about the timeline that even any Palestinian would acknowledge that. Palestinians have been offered, Arabs have been offered so many peace deals from the Israelis. And when I look at it now, I used to be, it took me years to overcome my young indoctrination. It took me being here and reading and being opening up to points of view that are different. But I look at it and I'm like, man, we got offered so many chances to set the situation straight and have peace, and every time rejected it. And I used to say, like, if you talked to me 10 years ago, I would have said, no, it's the Israelis' fault. But when you look at the data with new eyes, and you look at it with eyes of logic and honesty, you say, wow, it's not perfect. They can't give us everything.
Yeah.
And I feel even in 2000, they offered a very good deal, which included most of Jerusalem. And we rejected it. And the response to it in every case was intifadas and violence by Hamas.
Yeah, they do not want peace. I will say that. At least the leaders, Hamas, who are the self-imposed tyrants of Gaza, coming in 2006 and then throwing all of their predecessors off the roofs.
Exactly. They did it to the people. And fortunately, we're talking in a good day today. Sinwar is dead. He's been confirmed.
Yes, so, I saw that. Yes.
Another tyrant goes down the way of all the other tyrants, so hopefully it makes me hopeful that people will see the light. And, people of Gaza, if they really wanted freedom, I think this is the time to, turn against.
Now, what do you think about that? Because what I think the right thing to do is to try and separate Hamas, for example, from the Palestinian people.
Yes.
Right? Look, there's leadership here. They are tyrants. They are bloodthirsty. They hate Israel. But has that culture also trickled down, to all of the people? That is it? What are your thoughts on that? Is there, in other words, if there's a level of hatred to Jews in Israel throughout the population, I don't see how you ever get anything done, because that becomes the most important thing. That becomes more important than prosperity. That becomes more important than freedom. That becomes more important than opportunities for your children. It's a cultural issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what's been the saddest thing for me in this last 12 months? The saddest thing has been, so I was kind of a social media recluse for 2 years before that. I didn't go much on social media. And then I started going social media because I want to see what's happening. And what's been shocking to me is, including people I've known for years, people who are intellectuals, people who I considered smart, people who I considered moderate. And I look at their discourse on social media. I look at the Arab discourse on social media in general, and it is disgusting. It disgusts me. When I look at these demonstrations on campuses, and I even hear, like, I see Hezbollah and Hamas's flags raised, on campuses, I feel disgusted. And I feel like that whole indoctrination, I mean, I would understand people, kids in the Middle East who would demonstrate, raise Hamas flags and all of that. But then you look at American kids, Arab American kids born here, went to school here, and I see them do that. It troubles me deeply because I do not want that here. I do not want that culture here. But I fear that what's happening is that first they're indoctrinated in their family, because you still have, unfortunately, the Islamic tie. The religion itself has enshrined in it, there is like these lines in it that don't get activated all the time, but in times like this, they get activated, which is hatred of the Jews, hatred of the Christians, hatred of whoever, hatred of dogs. They hate everyone. And it gets triggered in these people's families. And then they go to school and they are reading Howard Zinn. They are reading all of that leftist history. They're reading about oppressor and oppressed. They go to college and there's more of that. And, of course, they don't know the language well. They don't know the culture well. They're going off totally of emotional arguments. Who doesn't get moved when they see a kid in the rubble, or a kid being injured, or a baby shaking after a bombing? You have to be a subhuman to not feel anything. So they go off of that, but they make it so dominant, it shuts down their logical, logical intake somehow, and they stop thinking and they stop evaluating. And the result is you get, someone walking on campus and basically dressed as a Hamas fighter, which, to be honest, I think if I was a university president, if you're raising a terrorist flag, I wouldn't just suspend you. I will basically kick you out of the university, because that's incitement to violence. And I can't believe that university administrators don't see this. Like, how can you, if you're a Jewish student, or if you're an American student, I mean, I've seen them burn American flags. I've seen them tear down American flags. How can you do this?
It's a fact that the administrators at universities are further left than the faculty.
Exactly.
So that makes a little bit of sense there. And it's just so odd, isn't it, that you get this anti-Semitic viewpoint that comes from the hard left and the hard right, and they both kind of meet together, and then it's just pointed at the Jews. It's just the oddest thing, It's from both ends of the fringe of the political spectrum. So I didn't know if you knew this, but Coates, right? Ta-Nehisi Coates visited BYU just a few years ago.
That's really interesting. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. So I watched it. I watched this talk, and it was on, basically liberation through arts. Is what the talk was on, and it's just, again, it's just odd. It seeps into everywhere, this type of mentality of the victim and oppressor, and it has to be a part of everything. And so to twist something like the Israeli Palestinian conflict. I mean, look, there are valid points, I would say, even on both sides that you could look at to talk about, but to twist it into what they're twisting it into, it is deranged.
It is deranged, and here is the thing: it's a framework that doesn't work in the context of the Middle East. You can't take that critical race theory, oppressor oppressed, slavery, reparations or whatever, and implement it in the Middle East. It does not work like that. What Coates fails to do also in the book is, I don't think he has any clue about the struggle. There has been a struggle about Arab identity since I could read. There is a struggle. So when we were going to school as kids, they would tell us, okay, you're an Arab because you speak Arabic, because you believe in Islam, because and then they talk about other cultural aspects, but those were the two main ones, the language and the religion. And then you would say, but how about me being a Christian? And Christians were always like, Arab Christians, you're not, you're an Arab, you speak Arabic, but you don't belong to this religion. And now, so in 1990, when Saddam invaded Kuwait, the first Gulf War, and I remember this clear. I mean, as a new university graduate, I lived that intellectually in a very deep way. It affected me personally, affected my family, everything. And at that point, you saw the people in the Gulf immediately doubt their Arab identity. So the Kuwaitis, for example, refused to identify as Arabs after the first Gulf War because, hey, we thought we were all brothers. How can you invade me and take away my sovereignty? The Saudis felt the same way. The Emiratis felt the same way. There has been this disintegration all of a sudden. And then you started hearing of the Lebanese saying, we're not really Arabs. We're Phoenicians. The Lebanese Shiites in the south were like, we're Shiites. We identify more with the Iranians. The Egyptians all of a sudden were the descendants of the pharaoh. So people in North Africa are all of a sudden saying we're Tamazighs, we are not, Arabs really. So there was this disintegration in Arab identity. And then that's when the whole radical Islamic movement started coming in. Because after the first Gulf War, I feel like Arabs all of a sudden throughout the region felt we're kind of worthless people, really, to be brutally honest. That's the general feeling. If you sit in an Arab conversation, there is a lot of sarcasm and what do you call it, self-deprecation and amongst Arabs. Like, what do we produce for humanity? We produce nothing. We don't even produce as many books as Finland produces. So there is all of that. So Islamic identity comes back into the scene, the Islamic Brotherhood, and they are everywhere. I mean, Hamas is Islamic Brotherhood. They have branches everywhere. And it's saying you are first and last, you are Muslims. That identity gets pushed up to the top because that is the movement, right? That can bind everybody together. Exactly. And so what you see in Europe when the ISIS crisis was happening is that all of these kids in Europe all of a sudden feel, and there is a criticism to be said about European society and how it deals with immigration. It's totally different than the United States. The United States is a melting pot. It's sink or swim, that's true, but America is wonderful in the sense that there is freedom of speech, freedom of meeting, freedom of worship. So you can be really all you can and you want to be in the United States, in America. In Europe, it's kind of different. It's more of a socialist society, I'd say proto-socialist society. Government controls a lot. They do not treat their immigrants, they nanny their immigrants a lot, trying to help them, but they also don't give them a lot of rights in society. It's a little hard to explain, but the ISIS crisis, you had all of these kids who are seeking a community and they say, okay, we want to be Arab. How can we be Arabs? We will be Muslims. And so now here in the United States, what's happening, and this is a puzzle I haven't really solved yet, or I haven't come to a conclusion about yet. So I was interpreting for conference the other day, and right in front of conference building, there was, an LGBTQ person dressed as a woman, had a beard and everything. And he was basically advocating for Hamas. And I was like, I thought we were safe here from, like, I couldn't imagine this happening in Utah, but it was this person and cronies. And I was like, oh my gosh, do you know what will happen to you in an Islamic society? Do you know what Hamas would do to you? Do you know what Hezbollah
would be thrown off a roof?
Oh, that is the merciful way to deal with it. There are other things that are too horrible to mention here, but this is this person from an Arab background. He wants to be Arab, but his way of doing it, showing solidarity with these, organizations that in his mind represent resistance, Islamic resistance. And that to him or her is the value that is above everything else. And that's what's been happening. That's the story. And I think, I'm not sure, but that's what's happening to Arab American kids. But you even have Jewish kids, Jewish American kids, the red shirts, if you've seen them in demonstrations, who like to say as a Jew, but they're not really, like, they are maybe cult bagel Jews, but they are not, practicing Jews. They go in and have solidarity with these people. It's not because they have a problem with their identity. I think they consider themselves American, but it's because they have been sucked into this oppressed narrative.
They feel guilty. They're made to feel guilty.
Yes, they feel guilty, and there is Jewish guilt is real. They talk about it a lot. They feel guilty, and they feel that, and their intentions are good, but they do not understand the real background of this. They don't understand because I think people like Howard Zinn, all of these, Rashid Khalidi, all of these historians have been the dominant discourse, and they don't tell the truth about what's happening. They don't tell honest truth. And you'd hope from someone like Ta-Nehisi Coates, who's educated, prolific, brilliant writer, you would have, and that's why I'm angry at him. You'd think he would offer like a balanced approach, a balanced opinion. Hey, I looked at this, and here is the arguments for and against. Here is what's going right. Here is what's going wrong. But then he goes, and like an adolescent child, he takes on, like, all of a sudden he's suspended his own thinking, and he writes this emotional book talking about home demolitions. Okay, yes, I've watched many of these home demolitions happen. It is devastating, especially for someone like me, knowing that the person whose house has been demolished probably worked all of his life to build it, right? It is devastating. And the Israelis know that. But the Israelis also are reacting to, hey, your kid went in and stabbed 5 people and killed them, and we can't punish him, but we're going to punish you because most likely you've been collaborating with him. This is how the logic goes. It doesn't follow American, criminal justice procedure, right? So to us, it might seem, okay, barbaric, unfair, all of that. But the Israelis, I have to say, what are they going to do? They built a wall. They tried to separate. They left Gaza. They told the Palestinian Authority, hey, we're going to give you the West Bank, make something off of it. And instead, they did nothing. They enriched themselves because they're corrupt and did nothing for the people. And the Israelis, going back to your earlier point, how can the Israelis trust that these neighbors of theirs will ever be peaceful towards them? Right now, they can't.
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, even going back to your thought about they don't want peace, essentially.
Yeah,
and that seems to be the case. Certainly, at least with Hamas. It was the timing for October 7th last year is very interesting because Saudi Arabia was reportedly about to sign the Abraham Accords.
Yes.
Right then, and if that you had Saudi Arabia, one of the major players in the Middle East, all of a sudden sign on to this thing, then they're very much rivaled with Iran, right? And so
exactly,
it's like no, we do not want this. We're not going to allow this. And Iran has no influence over that whatsoever as a rival to them. And so, hey, let's have this happen now. We've been planning it for a while. Let's do it now so that we can't have these Abraham Accords signed.
The Iranians were planning this at a much larger scale, and that's something I learned last week. So Hezbollah in the north was planning a synchronous attack with Hamas that same day on the northern settlements, which would have been a major disaster for the Israelis, right? So, but Hamas and Hezbollah were made for that moment, and by a miracle from God, only can be a miracle, Hezbollah decided not to go with Hamas on October 7th, probably because Hamas held it tight, held the operational deadlines so tight because they didn't want it to leak. So Hezbollah couldn't synchronize with them. But you're right, and Hamas is an expert. So I remember, back in 1995, I was in Jordan, and it was right after Jordan signed a peace treaty with the Israelis. And I would say I was in Jordan during the period, and Israelis were coming to Jordan, Jordanians were going to Israel. There was this cordial relationship. You'd see kippahs and stuff downtown Amman. Everything is happening well. And then Hamas goes in and they start their suicide bombings inside Israel, the buses. And, the Israelis, surprisingly, even with Rabin assassinated by settlers because they thought it was too much, Sharon, they did nothing until the big massacre on Pesach, on the Pesach, the Spring Festival, and they went and massacred the whole family. But Hamas bombed like they are experts in bombing peace treaties. Experts in bombing peace because all of these Islamic groups do not want peace with the Israelis. They want the Israelis guns somehow, or Israelis under Islamic thumb.
Well, it's in their charter, right? To destroy
Israel.
It's part of their charter. And so it's like, okay, well, when you build something on that, instead of saying we're going to build upon the idea of well-being for all of those in Gaza, we're going to build up the economy, we're going to build up family, we're going to build up trade, we're going to do everything we need to do here. Instead, if it's put over here that their primary purpose is to be against Israel, and they're going to do everything they can to keep it that way.
Exactly.
That's their purpose for existence at that point.
Exactly. I was looking at the Sinwar's body video an hour ago, and I was like, there was a sense of sadness, not for him, but I was like, what if this person wasn't infected with this hate, with this ideology of his? He, you look at his organizational capability. He, built this organization, and it's obviously has all of these skills. Why wouldn't he put it towards managing and running Gaza to be, a prosperous place, good for Palestinians to live? And maybe the Israelis would look at that and say, wow, these people, are ready for peace. They've built an economy, they're prosperous, they don't want to kill us. If his energies were directed towards something like that, I think the Israelis would be very open for peace. One other thing that has been a surprise for me this last year is I started immersing myself in everything Israeli podcasts, news, listening to what their intellectuals, generals, politicians say. I'd say, and this is my personal opinion, that there is more willing. Israelis want peace, genuinely. They want peace. They want peace. But they want to feel safe. And if the neighbors, Egypt, the Jordanians, the Lebanese, the Palestinians, make them feel safe and genuinely make them feel safe, and they're genuine about this, I think the Israelis would welcome that. I think the Israelis would actually give the Palestinians more than they think they can get. But the problem now, I've listened to people on the extreme right. I've listened to people who follow Meir Kahane, who are Kahanists. Okay, I've listened to people on the extreme left of Israeli thinking, and across the spectrum, I believe they want peace. They genuinely want peace, but they want safety. They want to know for sure that their neighbors do not want to kill them. Because, I mean, you've been to the region. You know, you can stand in Bethlehem and shout, and on a silent night, probably someone would hear you in Jerusalem if you scream. That's how close these people are. And if I'm living so close to someone, I want to know that they're not going to sneak at me in the middle of the night and start stabbing my babies. So we need to give them that. Yeah.
So I have been to the region, but it's interesting that you talk about this Arab identity also, because I just this last time that I was there in September, there were two individuals. One was a woman that was served as a tour guide for us, and it's someone that we've known for a very, very long time, and so she's very familiar with the gospel, right?
Yeah, great.
And even teaches it a little bit at the archaeological sites.
We need to send her to the branch there.
Yeah, we need to, absolutely. But anyway, she's Muslim, but very open-minded. She believes in a true gospel, and that Latter-day Saints have a good portion of this true gospel, right?
Yeah.
And but anyway, she was saying, here she was in a bus with all of us, and she's talking, and she says, "Now you should know exactly what you were saying. You should know we are not Arabs in Egypt. Yeah. We are Egyptians.
Exactly.
And we have a heritage that goes all the way back here to those that built these sites and everything else. And so her identity as a race is not Arabic.
Exactly.
In that sense. Or if it is, it's kind of secondary.
It's secondary.
Yeah.
This has been happening as long as I've been alive. But you have to keep in mind, and this is something probably your Arab American listeners will find offensive, but it is the truth. Before, until 1917, there was no sense of Arab identity because everyone was a part of the Ottoman Empire. Everyone considered themselves Ottoman Turk, including the people who lived in places like Egypt. Egypt was a part, of the Ottoman Empire. It was a satellite ally, but it was under Ottoman rule in many ways. The Egyptian king, was under al-Bab al-Ali, the high door, they call it in Turkey, in Istanbul. So he would answer to the Turkish Khalif. Okay. And the same thing in Iraq. And those were the two countries where you can say, okay, this is Iraq, this is Egypt. But the rest of it, there was very little national identity. People did not identify as Iraqi or Jordanian. There was no Jordan. Most of the major tribes that are in Jordan today were transplants from the Arabian Peninsula. They came in with Lawrence of Arabia, and they settled in the Transjordan. So that whole place, there is no, like you'd ask someone from Lebanon or Syria nowadays. In those days, they would say, "Oh, I'm from Asham, I'm from the Levant," but there was no national identity. Everyone was a part of the Ottoman Empire, and you were Muslim, you were Jewish, you were Christian, and that's how people identified. And so the whole idea of Arab nationalism came in after the Turks left. You had the Arab national movement, it was the age of nationalisms. And that's when people started saying, hey, we're going to have, and to be honest, it's the fault of the British and the French. They divided the area in Sykes-Picot and tried to create that, okay, you're a different country. They had the divide and conquer policy. So they are not without blame. But the whole, for you to say that there is a country called, Palestine or even Jordan or Lebanon or Syria, these are all new inventions. So that's why, and when I was going to school, by the time I was born and started going to school in the 70s, that whole idea, okay, we're going to tell you why you're an Arab. And I always felt through school like it was being shoved down my throat because it was in every curriculum, right? You're an Arab, and it was undeclared, but you hate Zionists. The Jews are the enemy, the Israelis are the enemy, and there was no distinction. Nowadays the trick is, okay, we're not anti-Semites because we're not going to call you Jewish, we're going to call you Zionist. But I know that's not true, because when we were growing up, the way we were indoctrinated, no, you hate Jews, you hate Zionists, you hate anything that has to do with Israel, period. And and they didn't tell us that explicitly, but was implicit. That's how you're an Arab. It's a part of the program.
Yeah.
So now, again, as I said, after the first Gulf War, that came to a huge unraveling. Everyone is trying to say we're not Egyptian, we're not Lebanese, we're going back to our
really identities. Well, Jabra, this is a fascinating discussion. We're going to have you back on and go over some other things. I want to actually go over the war a little bit next time. And talk about what's going on, and hopefully it's over by then. But I don't know. We'll see how things go here. But I
will pray really hard tonight and this weekend that the death of Sinwar means the war is in Gaza is ended, because again I'm just sick of seeing children die for those monsters, and I want peace, and I want kids to go to sleep even in their tents. I want them to go to sleep, and I want those innocents to just not suffer anymore. It's horrible.
Yeah. Well, appreciate that. I'm looking behind you, and I realize I'm going to have to get you a few books to fill up the space behind you here.
Yeah, I still
don't have any. There's no books there. So
no, this is half of my library.
All right, Jabra, really appreciate it. Thanks so much for sharing everything with us.
Yeah, thank you, Greg.